Thank you. Okay. Sorry for the couple minute delay. Yes, you could answer. You could answer. I mean, over Zoom, according to most places, on the phone. Also, as long as there's no delay. Okay, so we're learning Leila Nishmas Yehuda Shmuel, Zochran Racha ben Yeshua Yosef Moshe, and Mordechai Chana, Zochran Racha ben Chaim Yitzchak Zev, and Aryeh Lev, Zochran Racha ben Yeshua Adam Zalman, the Neshama Shalom and Aliyah, the schus for the situation in Eretz Yisrael, and schus for hopefully a schus for Klal Yisrael. Again, anybody has any questions, just type it into the chat, and we'll try and answer all of them in the order or when we get to it. So last week we discussed Parave and all the I think we covered all or most of the situations that come up using Parave in the milchik pot and the putting into a fleshik pot, etc., etc. If anybody has any questions, they could ask about what we discussed last week. So tonight we'll discuss how onions are a little different than that, and then as another scenario that comes up a lot, which also has to do with similar to the Parave situation, is mixing up dishes, mixing fleishiks with milchiks, meaning pans, and somebody wants to know the dial-in number. The dial-in number is 64. I guess I should type it. Let me reply that. 646-558-8656. And I'm assuming the code is 123. 646-558-8656. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So we'll discuss. We're going to discuss. Let's say mixing. I don't think we discussed this last week. Mixing something Parave with a fleshik utensil in a milchik pot, etc., etc. Okay. Before we go with that. Maybe I should have explained this last week. Let's just understand what with something called in the Pasuk Noisen Tam Lefagam, if something gives off a bad taste. So, meaning anything after 24 hours, according to the Iker Din, but we'll see soon that there may be some coolers, but anything less than 24 hours is considered the tam coming out of there is considered a good taste. If it's been more than 24 hours, then the taste coming out of there is a automatic bad taste. Now you have to have emunas chachamim for these halachas, because how do we know that the taste coming out of spoons and pots after 24 hours is a bad taste, and before it's a good taste? I mean, the chachamim discussed it. I mean, they were discussing this thousands of years ago, so they didn't have labs. So we have to have the emunas chachamim, which Baruch Hashem we do. That is the situation, right? So basically, the Chachamim said that any taste coming out of a utensil after 24 hours, the assumption is it's a clean utensil, is considered a bad taste. Therefore, that can never make something not kosher. This is a very simple rule that comes up most of the time for most shilas in the kitchen, and when you just remember this rule, then it can make life a lot easier. Anything coming out of something that has not been used for hot for the last 24 hours cannot make anything not kosher. So for example, I take a pot. I'm in an Airbnb, let's say, right? I'm in an Airbnb. and I, by mistake, make pasta in the pot in an Airbnb. That pot has not been used in 24 hours. Even though that pot was used for treif, the food is going to be fine. 100% kosher, no reason in the world not to eat that food. Again, because the taste that came out can't possibly improve my food because it was a taste from something after 24 hours. Right? Same thing. If I took chicken and I cooked it in a dairy pot that hasn't been used in 24 hours, my chicken is 100% fine. There is no reason in the world to throw out that chicken. It would be about tashkis because any taste, dairy taste coming out of that pot after 24 hours is a bad taste. So therefore, it's not improving my chicken in any way, shape, or form, and therefore the chicken is perfectly fine. Now, what's confusing is that when you call up for a shaila or you text a shaila, you're told that the food is okay, but the pot has to be kosher. Very confusing for people. Like it should be one or the other, not somewhere down the middle. But when you think about it, the answer is very simple. The food is okay because you haven't used the pot in the pot in 24 hours. So therefore the taste coming into the pot, coming into the chicken from the pot is a bad taste. So therefore your food is fine. However, what are you going to use the pot for now? It's a dairy pot that has absorption of dairy in it, that now has absorption of meat in it. So what are you going to use it for? Just in a practical sense, you can't use it for more. You can't use it for more chicken because it's a dairy pot. You can't use it for dairy because it has meat absorbed in it. So we're stuck. We have nothing. There's nothing for us to do with it. So what are we going to do? We kasher it, right? Meaning, really, it doesn't need to be kasher. It's just a matter of there's just nothing to do with this pot. Meaning the food is okay, but we just don't know what to do with the pot. We're stuck. We're stuck in the middle. Now, maybe I should have explained this before. Maybe in this we'll explain it. I apologize. Why can't? Okay, so so somebody just asked, so why can't you use it for more chicken? So basically, if here's the question. Yeah, I should have explained this before. I apologize. Let's rewind a little bit, and we'll come back around full circle. It shouldn't be too complicated unless I make it complicated, in which case I apologize. I'm here to try and make it simple. Basically, if we know that taste coming out of a pot after 24 hours is not a problem, so why do I need milchik and fleshik pans and pots and pans and utensils? Why don't I just make sure that I cook, let's say Sunday will be a dairy day. So I'll cook everything dairy in the morning, and then Monday will be a meat day. So I'll wait for 24 hours. Let's say I'll finish making my dairy at 10 o'clock Sunday morning. Lunch and dinner will be dairy, and I'll eat on plastic utensils. So my pots haven't been used since 10 a.m. And then Monday, I'll start cooking my meat at 10:01 a.m. Monday. That's more than 24 hours later, and it's the taste coming out as a bad taste, right? Why can I do that? And then I only need one set of pots and pans and forks and knives, only one sink, one oven, and everything is going to be great. So the truth is, according to the Torah, if you go with the halachos from the Torah, that is true. You could do that. The Rabbanan made a gezerah and said, well, what happens if you start making your chicken on Monday morning at 9:59 a.m.? Right? If you start making your chicken at 9:59, your chicken is treif because it was only 23 hours and 59 minutes since the dairy was cooked. And like we explained, you have to have a lot of amunas chachamim here because is 1 minute really going to change anything? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So therefore, since the chachamim made a gezerah that you're not allowed to do this, you're never allowed to use a milchik pot, even if it's more than 24 hours for fleishiks. You can't use a fleshik pot, even if it's after 24 hours of milchiks, nor can you use a treif, a non-kosher like Airbnb. You cannot use the pots even after 24 hours because we're afraid you're going to use it within 24 hours. If you did it, like we learned last week, there's a big difference between doing it in the first place and if you did it, right? So if you did it, it's fine. But the pan is not going to be fine because bottom line is the pan is a not kosher pan. Either Either it's a chicken pan that was used for dairy, or it was a dairy pan that was used for chicken, or it became treif. So whichever way you want to do it, whichever way you describe it, whatever the scenario is, you're not allowed to use it according to the Rabbanon. So that's why you can't make more chicken in there, and you can't make more dairy in there. So you're stuck. So therefore, you have to kasher it. But the food after 24 hours is going to be okay. Right? So I hope that's very clear. Anything after 24 hours cannot make anything else treif. It itself can become treif because, again, if it gets absorbed by meat and it's a dairy pot, or if it's a meat pot and it gets absorbed by dairy, even after 24 hours, it can't be used because of this takanas chachamim. Okay, I'll tell you a different shita that we don't paskin like, but sometimes we will use it as a combination to allow things depending on the situation. There is an opinion that says that it doesn't need 24 hours to become a negative taste. Even overnight is enough. Now, overnight means that it has to be cooked before sunset, before shkiyah, and then after sunrise, it already has a bad taste, which again requires amunas chachamim because it's not an hours measurement, it's a night measurement. Like in the winter, night is 14, 15 hours. And in the summer, night is 10 hours. So it doesn't make a difference. It can go from 10 hours, 14 hours. It's just that the pot has to have stopped being used for hot meat before sunset, and then at sunrise, it already taste coming out of there is a bad taste. And we don't paskin that way. Let's make this very clear. We do not paskin that way, but we will use it in certain situations. All right? So that's just good to know. So sometimes if it's a complicated question and you're really desperate for it to be kosher, it's sometimes worthwhile to mention that it was not used overnight. But if it was cooked, let's say you cooked it tonight, after let's say tonight for Malava Malki, you cooked something, and then in the morning you want to rely on this heter, you cannot because it was already used past sunset. Okay, so I hope that's clear. There was a shaila in the Yated Neman. I don't know if anybody gets that, but there's a shaila that they asked to Israel Orbach and to Reb Zafrani, and there was a shaila asked from a soldier that's in Gaza, and he basically said, I mean, it's worth it to say over this shaila just to understand what's going on. This soldier is in Koilo, and he was called up as a reserve, so he's in Gaza. He says basically when they're in Gaza, where do they sleep? They sleep in the Arabs' houses that they took over, and he said they're hungry and they want to eat. And they want to use the pots and pans because the Arabs are not there. They left already. They chased them out. So they want to use the pots and pans. Now, it hasn't been used. Those pots and pans have not been used in 24 hours. So therefore, they really can be used according to the Torah. But the Rabbanan said you can't use them until you kasher them. Right? So the question was, in this Shasat Chag, where they have no other way to cook, can they use the pans? Okay, why can't they kasher them? Because there's a shortage of water there. So they don't have enough water to use to kasher. So therefore, they want to know if they could use it. So the answer was from the poskim that since they're in a desperate situation, they don't have to keep the gezer d'Rabbanan, and therefore they can use the utensils from the Arabs, Yimach Shemam, that they to cook with, right? So that's a situation where Shasat Chak, we would even allow somebody to use a pan that wasn't used in 24 hours. This could also come up with Balei Tshuva who have to go home, especially now they have to go home for the holidays, and there's nothing. The family sometimes cooks them food, but they don't know they have to kasher it. But the pots and pans haven't been used in 24 hours. So and it's a shasatcha because otherwise the families are uh, are helping them out and going along with them. But they say, well, we haven't kashered and we have to cook dinner now. So that's also a shasat chak. That's a shasat chak situation where you would be able to cook the food in it. Obviously, everybody has to ask their own individual question. But there was a couple of examples that of using something that wasn't used in 24 hours, which again, l'chatchila you can't do, but if it was done, then you're fine. Also, the 24 hours question being asked on the chat here. When does the 24 hours begin? The 24 hours begins from once the pot gets cooler than 110 degrees. And whenever the pot gets cooler than 110 degrees, then then that's when the clock starts for the 24 hours. It does not make a difference what the pot is made out of. So all pots you wait 24 hours, and then anything that comes out of it is never going to make anything asa. Okay, so now we discussed last week making something in the parave, making something parave in a meat pot, then adding cheese. So a few people ask, what about with onions? So let's just explain why onions makes things complicated. So we basically said there's two rules. Anything after 24 hours has a negative bad taste coming out of it, and it can't make anything trade. We also said that parave, the reason why parave is so much more lenient is because it's called not bar not, the taste, the son of a taste. Like we said, let's say using a meat pot. So the taste goes into the meat taste went into the pot, right? That's one tam. It went from meat to the pot. Now you took out the meat, you washed the pot. Now you're cooking pasta in it. That's taste of meat now coming out of the pot, going into the pasta. So that's already once removed. I taste again from the meat into the pot, and then from the pot into the parave food. And now you're taking that parave food, mixing it with dairy, so that the taste was not direct. It wasn't a direct taste of meat going into dairy. It was going through a pot first. So therefore, it's much more lenient. Anything sharp, like an onion, negates these two leniencies. So basically, anything that hasn't been used in 24 hours, but that's used with onions, makes it that the taste does taste good. Meaning, because onions, and this is what I understand why we put onions into food, is because it brings out flavor. So the same way that onion brings out the flavor in food, it also brings out the flavor in your pot. So if you take an onion and you fry it in a pot that hasn't been used in 5 days, because of the strong taste of the onion, it will take out the taste that's normally a bad taste from the pot, and it will make it into a good taste. It'll also take the once removed taste or the twice removed taste and make it as if it's an initial taste. So those two leniencies that we've been discussing for the last 2 weeks go out the window when it's something that's sharp, right? So that's why onions should only be cut with a parave knife. It's very wise. Basically, from what we learned last week, there's really no reason to have parave pots, because anything after 24 hours is going to be considered parave all the way around. And even within 24 hours in many situations, certainly according to Svardim, it's going to be considered parave. So really there really was no reason to have parave pots, but parave knife, yes. Because basically if you cut an onion with a knife that was fleishiks, even if that knife is not used for hot in many days, it's going to make that onion fleishiks. And now that's when all the problems start, because now you go fry it in a milk frying pan, and that onion the 24-hour rule doesn't apply to an onion, and the not bar not rule does not apply to onions, right? Now you may ask, okay, but there's no heat going on when you cut an onion with a knife. There's no heat. So onions, in addition to having that it knocks out the 24 hours, and meaning it eliminates the leniency of the 24 hours, and it also eliminates the not bar not or the parave leniency. Pressure from the knife will also transfer taste, right? Even without heat. So that's why the onions with a knife become fleishiks. And I didn't want to really concentrate so much on the onions because it's complicated, but all I can say is that so everybody hears about onions making everything treif. It's not necessarily true. So I don't want to confuse everybody, but basically onions, like we just said, onions eliminates the 24-hour rule and it eliminates the nat bar nat, meaning the taste, the son of the taste rule. There are many opinions that say that the two of them together, onions cannot affect the two of them together. So meaning if you're using a pot that hasn't been used in 24 hours and you're using them with parve onions, then it's still going to be considered parve because onions are strong to take one of these, either nat bar nat or the 24-hour rule. But to eliminate both of those leniencies, that an onion's not sharp enough to do. Sharp things that are sharper than onions, like radishes from the Gemara's times, that can eliminate both. But onions, not necessarily. I hope that's making sense. Bottom line is, the point is that if you have made a mistake with onions and you cut it with a fleshig knife and put it into a milk pot, many times, I would even venture to say the majority of the times, it's going to still be okay, unless the pan and the knife were used for hot in the last 24 hours. Then it won't be. But if you haven't used them in the last 24 hours, ask a shayla, because many times using all sorts of complicated calculations, it's still going to be okay. So again, the main rule to know is that try and only cut onions, radishes, those type of sharp things. We'll get to them in a minute. Try and only cut them with parve, and then that will save you most of the heartache. But if you didn't and you ended up mixing it up, then you ask a shayla. All right. Okay, I hope that's sufficient. If it's not clear and somebody wants me to explain it or expound on it, then please post it. Okay, so what are some of the things that are considered sharp? So radishes, onions, pineapple is debatable, lemons, garlic, pickles, not sweet pickles, but pickles. What else? I don't know. I guess if anybody wants to know, they could ask if that's considered sharp or not. But those are the leeks. But those are the basic things that are sharp. So basically radishes, onions, lemons. Those are the three major ones. Then some say even oranges, but grapefruit, pickles, garlic. Garlic's another one. Those jalapenos are certainly sharp. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so that's basically it. There was something I wanted to say about the sharp. Can't remember now. Okay, so that's basically what's sharp. Okay, so there's a question here. Melted margarine in an Eina ben Yoma fleshik bowl. Okay, margarine, I'm assuming is parve. Yeah. I want to put that hot margarine into a parve mixing bowl for a cake. Is that okay? I'm going to keep the mixing bowl of the cake parve. Yes, 100%. That's exactly what we're saying. Not only if an Eina ben Yoma fleshik bowl, but even in a ben Yoma fleshik bowl, it will keep the cake parve. The cake will be parve, and the mixing bowl and everything is going to be parve, even in a ben yoma. In a ben yoma, you could do it lechatchila. If you did it in a ben yoma bowl, so you wouldn't be able to eat it with dairy. If you did it in an ein ben yoma meat, if you did it, you melted margarine in a ben yoma meat bowl, you made a cake out of it, you would not lechatchila be able for Ashkenazim to eat it with cheese. But if you did it in an Eina ben Yoma, then you could eat it with cheese. And certainly everything is going to be parve. Yes, that is the main leniency that we learned last week. And yes, I understand it's very confusing. Let's see if I should have. I don't know how to get. You know what? I'm going to log into this because there's a couple of shortcuts. I don't know if anybody I imagine many of you have texted me questions. If sometimes you get, I'm telling you the secrets now, if sometimes you get a long-winded answer, that means I didn't type it up. I didn't type it up right then and there. It's pre-typed for all the common questions. I have about 100 pre-typed answers that just go out. They're not automatic. I have to type in a few letters, and then it goes.
Recording in progress.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, so if anybody can read those or copy them down for themselves, I hope that's a little bit helpful. Okay, if I want to make a pot of soup that has onions in it, does it need to be a pot? It really depends. It really depends on how. When did you? How did you make these onions in the soup? Right. Basically, if you want to, so this is another eitzah. If you want to make sure that an onion loses its sharpness before you put it into the soup, Aruch HaShulchan says if you take an onion and you soak it in water for a couple of minutes, that takes away the sharpness. If you do that, then the onion gets downgraded to a regular vegetable, and then you don't have a problem. So that's a little trick that you can do. And just soak it in water or cooking it. Cooking it also, well, if you cook the onion, it would also downgrade it to a regular vegetable. So if you're not sure how you want to make it, the simple thing to do is just take the onion and soak it a little bit in water for a couple of minutes, and then it loses its sharpness, and then everything you do with it is going to be fine. Other than that, if you want to make a parve soup with onions in it, so put in meaning if you put the onions into the water in the soup before you turn it on, meaning let's say you put the onions and the other ingredients into your soup with, I'm assuming there's water in the soup, and then it soaks in there for a couple of minutes, then that it no longer becomes sharp, and therefore your soup is 100% parve, even with onions. Now, even when you take an onion, if you have to look at the soup, that it's got to have enough onions that the taste is sharp, which most onion soups is not like that, which is a proof to what we're saying, right? Onion soup is not sharp. So because the cooking and the soaking takes away the sharpness. So basically, if you take all your ingredients and put it into the soup before it gets hot, then those onions will not be sharp and it will retain its regular parve status. Okay, cutting an onion with a parve knife on a meat cutting board. So there is a strict opinion that says that a cutting board will also make that onion into whatever the onion board is. Let's say it's a meat cutting board. So there is an opinion that says that it will become meat. We try and be concerned for that opinion, but we don't. We will not go with that. So lichatchila, we should also have a parve cutting board. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. If your margarine was melted in a non-clean microwave, it depends on how not clean it is. It would have to actually have pieces of meat or chicken in the microwave, edible pieces, which I don't think you have to have a large piece to give off taste, which I think most of the time is not going to be. You just wipe it down, and then it will be considered parve. Does the onion have to be peeled to soak it? I would assume not. I would assume just soaking. If you got to soak it enough time that it has time to penetrate the peel. Yeah, so you cut the onions before they go into the pot? Yes, but if you cut the onions with a parve knife and then put them into the pot before the pot is hot, so then that will downgrade the onions. Your knife is certainly not meat. Even if you cut with a parve onion on a meat cutting board, it will not. I'm not going to say certainly because there is an opinion that says that it is, but we don't paskin like that opinion. Okay, so all right, I should have maybe made a separate chair for onions, but but okay, let's try. Oh, somebody text me. Yeah. Uh, if horseradish is definitely considered something sharp. Uh, yes, if there's somebody that's also asking privately, if they take those pots back from Gaza, going back to our Shala with Gaza, they take them back there to Israel, I'm assuming they would need to be kashered. They would need to be kashered again. It could be that the actual cooking kashers it, even though normally you have to kasher with water and not with other foods. But yes, it would definitely have to be kashered again. Um, you cut off the roots. The roots, I think, in water would be fine. Um, yeah. Okay. So again, if you have onions, and by the way, there's an opinion that says that the onions nowadays are much less sharp than they were in the old days, which we know many people eat onion. I don't think anybody takes a bite out of an onion, but people take raw onions and put them on sandwiches all the time. So there are opinions, and we use these, um, and we use these onions. Sorry, we use this as also a combination to be lenient, in that some say that our onions nowadays are not the sharpness that we're talking about. We don't paskin like that. But again, using everything as we call as when a shiloh comes up, depending on how desperate the situation is, we will, like, so it's Friday afternoon and somebody just made a whole dish and they're gonna, and there's guests coming, etc., etc. We're gonna pull out all the stops to try and be as lenient as we can. So one of them is also that our onions nowadays, like Bali Musa like to say, like, our generation is not as strong as previous generations. Well, our onions are also not as strong as the previous generations. Maybe we don't have to be blamed. Maybe we could just say that everything is just weaker than previous generations. You don't need the tefillah on the Arab pots, because as long as they belong to the guy, as long as it belongs to a guy, it doesn't need tefillah. It only needs tefillah once it becomes a yid. So they're just using the Arab pots in Gaza. So since it still belongs to a guy, that's fine. That's why in an Airbnb or you go to a hotel, you're allowed to use the cups to drink, and the pots, if you kasher them, and you don't need tefillah because they still belong to a guy. Okay, so now, so you're asking about a Parave pot and a meat dishwasher. Okay, so that's what we were meant to discuss. That's one of the things we're meant to discuss tonight. So let's analyze what happens. Let's go with just a simple, straightforward case. Again, keeping in mind not bar not, right? Nosin tam bar nosin tam. So let's say, it's usually the men that do this. So I don't know if this is for a lady share, but a man tries to be helpful and he's going to go wash the dishes. So he just takes the meat dish, he takes a meat pot and a dairy pot and washes them in the same sink. Okay, so now let's just analyze how this would work. Like we discussed last week, this is all about absorption of taste and transfer of taste. So how does taste transfer from one to the other? Right? So we said that if meat taste goes into a pot, that's one taste, that's one transfer of taste. Then it goes out of the meat pot into the pot of food. That's another transfer of taste. So that's a once removed or twice removed, depending on how you want to describe it, taste. Right? So now, if I'm washing I fill up a pot of water with a hot pot of water in the sink, a fleshik pot, and then in there is a milchik spoon. Right? So now, what happened here? You had the meat pot that had taste going into the pot, and now there's taste coming out of that pot, going into a milchik knife. Let's go a milchik spoon. A milchik spoon that had the milchiks got the dairy got absorbed into the spoon, and now it's a once removed taste of dairy mixing into a once removed taste of meat. Right. So basically, what you're doing is you're taking a meat pot and sticking in, and with parave inside, because the water is parave, and you're sticking in a dairy spoon, That's also, but it's not direct. It's not, you're not putting the actual dairy into the meat. You're into the meat pot. It's going through water. So it's again, it's not barnat. This is assuming that they're relatively clean. There's not actual pieces of meat and actual pieces of cheese on there. If you take a boiling hot water and you have actual cheese and actual meat on the pots and on the spoon, then yes, then that would require kasha. But that's not usually the case, right? So in that case, the extreme case that we just said, in that way you'd have to kasha. But what normally happens? So I'm going to take a spoon and a fork, and I'm going to run the water from the dishes on top of the spoon and the fork. Spoon and a fork. I'm saying let's go with a spoon and a spoon, a meat spoon and a dairy spoon. And I put on the hot water from the sink. So what happens? The hot water touches the meat spoon, right? And then it goes and it bounces onto the dairy spoon. Okay. Now, by that time, that's what we're going to call a kli shlishi, right? I know we discussed this in the Hilchos Shabbos Shiurim, but this also applies to kashrus, which is basically as follows. In a kli rishon, the taste absorbs. In a kli sheni, it really doesn't absorb, but we try to be strict. In a kli shlishi, it does not absorb. Right, so basically, when you wash your dishes, let's assume, again, we'll get back to what the temperature of the water has to be. Let's assume it's very hot water. So the kli rishon is the water that's in the hot water in the hot water tank in the basement. That's kli rishon. When it hits my knife, my fleshik knife, I'm sorry, I keep going through different examples. Let's say I have to get off the knife. Let's say a spoon. So I have a fleshik spoon, right? Used in the last 24 hours. Because again, remember, if things have not been used in 24 hours, that cannot transfer taste to anything. So this whole assumption is that we're talking about utensils that were used for hot in the last 24 hours. Okay? And then another thing, parenthetically, let's say you used it for hot soup or hot chicken. Hot means it has to have been at least 110 degrees. So if you serve the soup and then you take the soup and you put it into a bowl, right? Then by the time you get into the bowl, we're talking about the bowl is a kli sheni, sometimes even a kli shlishi. And it may not be 110 degrees. So therefore, that might not even be considered meat used in the last 24 hours. But okay, that's something else to keep in mind. But let's say it has been used in the last 24 hours, right? So now when the hot water hits that meat utensil, that would be pouring of a kli rishon. So that's it. So it's now on the water that's on that utensil is a kli sheni. Now when it bounces and hits the dairy utensil, that's already a kli shlishi. Therefore, a kli shlishi cannot transfer taste. So you're not going to have a problem. Okay. So again, the first line of defense to make that your utensils that are washed together is that if they haven't been used in 24 hours, like we've been saying, it can't transfer taste. That's one. But even if it was used in the last 24 hours, it has to be in a kli rishon together, which is the original case that we said, where you have a boiling hot pot sitting in the sink, and it would maybe be considered a kli rishon. Maybe it's the era of a kli rishon, and then you have to have actual dairy and actual meat in the pot, and then you have a problem. Other than that, the kli rishon is the hot water heater, and from what's coming out of the hot water heater, that's all a kli rishon. Yeah, basically you have to look at the faucet. That the faucet's a kli rishon, just like an urn. An urn is a kli rishon. When it goes into a cup, that cup becomes a kli sheni. So the bottom line is 99% of the time, any utensil, dairy utensil that gets washed with a meat utensil is going to be okay. Because in order for it to be a problem, let's just use an example. Let's say this seltzer, right? So let's say this was meat seltzer. Obviously, there's no seltzer. Let me drink it. Okay, so now this is a ben yoma. Let's say my seltzer was meat. So it's a ben yoma. So I'm washing that seltzer. This is a meat pan, meat cup, dairy cup. And I put them both under the sink. Now, the hot water, when it hits this, it's a kli sheni. right? Because the hot water coming out of the sink is a kli rishon. When it hits this, it's a kli sheni. Then it bounces to this, then it's a kli shlishi. The only way that it would be a problem, theoretically, is if it's boiling hot water and then the water coming down actually touches both of these at the exact same time. So they would have to be right next to each other, and the initial hot water would have to be hitting both of these at the same time. So basically, it would have to be on the top, because if the hot water hits here first, then rolls down and then hits here, that's already a kli sheni. I hope I'm not making this confusing. Basically, the point is that it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to have something treif that you're washing in the sink. Now that's one. Kula number two is if you're using soap. So then let's say you have the taste. Remember we said that if a pot after 24 hours gives off a bad taste. So now even if this pot was used within 24 hours, if I have soap on it, when the taste is coming out of this pot, it mixed itself up with soap, and then is going to touch this. Again, this is meat, this is dairy. The taste going into the dairy is a negative taste. It's a bad taste. It's got soap mixed into it. So that is going to make it that it's not a problem. Right? That's leniency number two. Leniency number three is that you have to have the temperature of the water. Like we said, in order to transfer taste, you have to have heat. Heat is 108 degrees, 110 degrees. Again, women who are in the kitchen a lot have a much higher tolerance of heat than people that are not in the kitchen. Like I myself have an extremely low, I don't drink coffee, I don't drink tea, so I burn my mouth very, very easily. And my hands certainly, because they're not used to touching anything hot, for better or for worse. I mean, I guess it's for better that I'm not in the kitchen, that's for sure. But even somebody who's constantly in the kitchen, to keep your hands washing dishes at 108 degrees, I think would be very, very hot. So it would also depend if you're wearing gloves, then maybe you'll have the tolerance. But the third leniency that we're saying, again, the first leniency we're saying is that it has to be in a actual kli, at the minimum, an area of a kli rishon, which is very difficult to get because they'd have to actually hit the meat and the dairy utensil at the exact same time to transfer the taste, which is almost impossible because they bounce off from one to the other. That's one. Two is many times soap is being used. Three is that the temperature is very rarely 108 degrees, 110 degrees. Leniency number four is Ramosha Feinstein says that if there's ever any cold water running together with the hot water, then that makes it into a kli sheni. Meaning, why does kli sheni become a kli sheni? Because it cools down the water. Why? Because the walls of the kli sheni, meaning when I take, let's say a kli rishon, let's say this is water from an urn, boiling hot kli rishon, and I pour it into here. So how come this is a kli sheni? It's pretty much, it's a little less the temperature, but it's still very hot. The reason is because the walls are cold, cool off the intensity of the heat. So Ramosha Feinstein says, if pouring it into a kli sheni cools off the heat, then of course, if I have cold water running with the hot water, will also decrease the intensity. So therefore, in almost all cases, some people have some form of cold water on with the hot water when they're washing the dishes, and therefore, it also can't transfer taste, right? So, and that's why if anybody only has one sink, then always, if you don't want any shilas ever, and nothing will ever be a shilah, just always make sure to have a little bit of cold water on. Doesn't mean that your water can still be very hot. As long as there's a little bit of cold water on, that's bringing the temperature and or intensity of the heat of the water down, then that's enough to make sure that nothing is going to transfer taste. So basically, with those four leniencies, you're going to pretty much never have a shilah on utensils. You find a milk utensil in the meat sink, or vice versa. And then also common shilah is that you have a cleaning lady, and you open the drawer for the meat dishes, meat utensils, and you see a dairy one in there. Just take it out and use it. It's no problem because the chances are almost zero that there actually is going to be a transfer of taste. And the same thing applies to a dishwasher. Because a dishwasher, But a dishwasher is a little bit more common because a dishwasher uses pure hot, from what I understand. I was never in a dishwasher, but that's what they say. That it uses a pure hot cycle, and sometimes it uses it without soap. There's a cycle without soap, but it's really only spraying the water around, so it's hard to say that the water will actually hit the dairy utensil together with the meat utensil. But there are poskim that do say that if you find a meat utensil in the dairy dishwasher or vice versa, then it will not make everything in the dishwasher tray, but that actual utensil should be kosher. I personally do not go with those opinions, and I go with the opinions that say that it's fine. Just wait 24 hours, just in case it's treif. It did become treif. If you wait 24 hours, anyways, we know everything is okay. It's we say not to use it, but in this situation, where in all probability the transfer didn't, the taste didn't transfer anyways, so on the small chance that it did in the dishwasher, wait 24 hours. I hope that that's clear. Yeah. So the clear rishon is the faucet. Yeah. What about the sponge? Okay, we'll get back to the sponge in a minute. Even if the dish was used in the last 24 hours, again, using the 4 leniencies that we just said, it's almost impossible for the taste to actually transfer. If you find a milking spoon in the flesh dishwasher, so the same thing, where, like I just said, some would tell you to kasher the milking spoon. I personally go with opinions that say you don't have to, just wait 24 hours and it's okay. However, when people move into a new house, they're always asking about whether they can use the old dishwasher. Theoretically, there would be a way to use it. Most places can say that you should not use that dishwasher. It's considered treif. It's too hard to kasher. Just get a new one. Dishwashers, as kitchen appliances go, is on the cheaper end than the other appliances. Something you have to get new racks because they're hard to clean. The racks, new racks, from what I understand, cost almost as much as a new dishwasher. So once you're doing that, you might as well just get a new dishwasher. Okay, can Parave dishes be put down in a meat and dairy sink when washing them with hot water? If they haven't been used, if the sink has not been used with hot for 24 hours, yes, 100%. You can even put them down. Again, that gets back to our Parave. That's why we're discussing it as a follow-up from last week. The same way that we said that if you take pasta and you cook it in a pot, in a meat pot that hasn't been used in 24 hours, you could even take the food from that meat pot and put it into a dairy pot. So then, and even if it was used in 24 hours, you can do that. So if you know that you just have Parave dishes, and then if you know for sure you have Parave dishes and the sink is clean, you can even put down the Parave dishes and wash regular hot, etc., and it's no problem. Lichatchila. Parave dishes in the meat dishwasher, we say not to do lichatchila because a dishwasher, there's a lot of junk in the dishwasher on the bottom. So what it could do is when it's spraying it around, again, I was never in a dishwasher. It would actually be helpful if I went into a dishwasher. I don't think that's too safe. And I probably wouldn't know what to look for anyways. But we're worried about in the dishwasher, there are chunks of food flying around in there in the filters, although I heard though the new dishwashers don't have filters. So it's a little bit difficult to know what's going on in the dishwasher. So it's not lechatchila because we're afraid for actual meat. But if theoretically you knew that your dishwasher was 100% clean and there were no meat particles flying around in there, then you would lechatchila be able to wash your Parave dishes. But we say not to do it just because we're not exactly sure what's going on in that dishwasher. Can a microwave be used for fleishes and meals within 24 hours? No, because that's a utensil. We said even after 24 hours, the Rambanan made a gezerah that you're not allowed to use. It's the same. Microwave will be the same thing as a pot. Just like you can't use a meat pot for milchiks after 24 hours, even though if you did, the food is okay. That's the main thing that, I mean, I don't know, it's the main thing we have to get out today, but that's one of the basic things that we have to know. If it was not used in 24 hours, the food is going to be okay, but the utensil will have to be kosher, and you can't use it lechatchila that way. Right? So therefore, a fleshik milchik microwave, even if you wait 24 hours, cannot be used for the opposite type. If you did, then the food's going to be fine. You should kasher the microwave, but you can put If you have a microwave that hasn't been used in 24 hours, or even if it was used in 24 hours, and you warmed up macaroni in it, and now you want to add cheese, that would be mutter. That is mutter, because again, that's the taste of a, let's say, a meat dishwasher going into parve. Then that would be okay. You just can't put actual milchiks in a meat microwave, or the opposite. I hope that's clear. If it's not, then let me know. Um, yeah. So he asked me about to put the. I made a mistake with the putting the parve into the. I said you can put the parve pans down in the sink even if it was not used for boiling water in the last 24 hours. Even if it was used for boiling water in the last 24 hours, as long as it's clean, you're allowed to put the pots down in there. But it's pretty much safe to know that what are the chances of boiling hot meat water being used in your sink in the last 24 hours? Probably slim to none if it's ever used with boiling water, because again, once you use cold water on, then it's not considered using it with hot water. So almost always the sinks are not going to be considered ben yomas. So if it was not ben yoma, then you're fine. You're fine to put the pots down. But yes, you can put again. So to answer your question, warm water, you can put the pot of dishes down into the fleshik sink. Basically, if there's anybody out there that sells pot of sinks for a living, we're pretty much eliminating the need for a pot of sink at all, or for even pot of pots and pans. I mean, it can make your life slightly more convenient, but I'm not even sure it's worth the whole headache to have a set of pot of pots, etc., etc. Pot of knives, yes. Pot of pots, it's a chumrah, but it's not really necessary. Water taps that don't have separate hot and cold knobs are considered as a kli rishon. If you have it only on hot, then yes. But you should always, don't keep it all the way when hot is usually to the left, right? When you're using the hot water from the sink, don't put it fully to the left. Put it a little bit to the right so that there's some cold water coming out, and then you'll never have trafe issues with your sink. Okay, pot, parve strainer with legs. Can I place hot strainer and drain boiling pasta in dairy sink? Yes, 100%. That could be done. You could even do that with a meat pot with parve in it and drain it in the dairy sink if the pot wasn't used in the last 24 hours. And I hope I'm being clear with that. You can take a meat pot that hasn't been used in 24 hours. If you cook pasta in it and you want to drain it or strain it in a milchik sink, no problem. Because again, anything not used in 24 hours is not a problem. If we said the Chachamim made a gezerah that you can't use something even after 24 hours for the opposite type, but that's if it's straight to the opposite type. Meaning, Chachamim made it, I hope I'm being clear with this, that the Chachamim said, you have a meat pot, you cannot use it after 24 hours for actual dairy. But to use it after 24 hours for parve, and then you want to drain it or add it to meat, to put into a meat pot, it's no problem. So it's only the Chachamim's gezerah was only from direct meat taste into direct milk taste. That's it. For parve, they never made the gezerah. Oh, so getting back to the sponges, thank you. So sponges is a little different because a sponge, it has a lot of residue on it. So basically, if you took a meat sponge and you used it under hot water for actual dairy, like you take the meat sponge and then let's say you have crusted macaroni and cheese and you use it under hot water with the actual macaroni and cheese. So again, even if you use our example of keeping on some cold water, or the water wasn't so hot, but the bottom line is stuck in that sponge will be probably particles of actual cheese. So yes, theoretically, if you clean the sponge very well and you never used hot water and you never used boiling hot water, not boiling, just hot water at the temperature of 108 degrees, then theoretically you could reuse the sponge. I personally tell people, unless it's an expensive sponge, the sponge that costs 75 cents, $1, I don't know what the inflation, maybe $1.50 now. If you know that that sponge had actual meat particles in it and then you used it for actual dairy, it's advisable. I'm not saying halachically you have to do this. It's advisable to just get a new one because you have no idea if there's particles in there. But Me'ikar adin, it's probably okay. So the parm dairy dishes need to be cleaned with separate sponges. Again, getting back to this, the problem with the sponges is that they sometimes have actual meat and dairy. Same thing like we discussed with the dishwasher. Sometimes the dishwasher has stuck inside of it and in the drain actual particles of meat or dairy. So it's a little bit more difficult to be lenient, although me'ikar adin, especially if you don't use it with boiling hot water. Not boiling, I keep saying boiling hot water, I mean very hot, meaning using it with cold, and me'ikar adin, it's not going to be a problem, but I would advise just to have a separate Parave sponge. Yeah, so when you drain noodles into the sink from a meat pot, yeah, I don't know when that was posted before I discussed it or not, but certainly if the pot wasn't used in 24 hours, it's okay. And even if the pot was used for meat in 24 hours, b'diavad, it's for sure okay. So if you're desperate. Yeah, when I mean to add cold water, I mean that instead of just keeping the hot on when you wash the dishes, also turn on a little bit. It doesn't have to be warm. The water can still be hot. As long as there's some cold water flowing out with the hot water, then it's not going to ever make anything. It can't transfer taste. You have to have separate flation milk drain boards. Drain boards, I'm assuming, do you mean what you dry the dishes on? If that's the case, no, you don't need separate. Many people have it, but you don't need separate. Yeah, soap on the sponge will again knock out the taste, but you have no idea if inside the sponge is still going to be particles of meat or dairy in there. Okay, so hot water kettles, that's a good question. I know we're pretty much on overtime now. Hot water kettles. So basically, I don't know if we have enough time to do hot water kettles, but basically if you're going to use a hot water kettle to put straight into chicken or straight into dairy, it's best if you keep the pot or bowl that you're putting it into. It's best to keep it low enough that the steam coming out will not be hot when it hits the spout. I hope I'm being clear. Basically, if this would be the hot water urn, right? And here's the spout of the hot water urn, and this is my cup of let's say hot chocolate or coffee, and I'm adding water. So basically what will happen is that it's hot water that goes into this pot, and then the steam comes up, and we're afraid that the steam, let's say it's milchik steam, will go make this milchiks. In almost all cases, you could keep your hand there and it will not burn. So since you can keep your hand there and it will not burn, which is most of the time, then it's not going to affect this, because like we said, it has to be hot. The only problem could be is maybe if you put it right up to the spout, then maybe it'll be hot enough. Even then, we'll end up being more lenient, but the best thing to do is to keep it a little further down, and then certainly it's not a problem. Bez Hashem, next week I would like to get back to that if somebody could remind me to discuss that. But that's your basic eitzah for that. You need separate meat and dairy gloves for washing dishes. It's safer to do if you know you're going to actually be using hot water. The problem is also gloves sometimes are not always the cleanest. So I can't tell you me'ikar adin that you have to, but you could, but it's preferred to. You need separate hot gloves taking food out of the oven. No, you do not. One type of gloves is fine. I would like to discuss ovens in an upcoming week. Does the rule with steam and water kettle working with the same spices? Yes, spices is the same halacha with spices. Yes, 100%. Yeah, okay, I guess we'll stop here. So just review very quickly what we discussed tonight. Anything after 24 hours, it can never make any food into a problem. Right? So then, again, you use the meat pot and then you cook cheese in it after 24 hours, it's not a problem. However, you're going to have to kasher the pot. The reason why you have to kasher the pot is because the Chachamim made a takana that even after 24 hours, even though the taste comes out, the taste coming out of it is bad, but you can't use it. You can't use it for that, for the opposite type, because we're afraid you're going to use it within 24 hours. So that's the first thing. But anything after 24 hours in a bidiyavad situation cannot make anything treif. Washing dishes, we said basically there are 4 leniencies that were going on that will not, onions. We discussed onions. So a lot of these clues don't apply to onions. However, in most situations, even when you cook with onions with spoons and forks and pots of the opposite type, most of the time the shaila will end up being makel, but it's a little bit more strict because we said onions negates the leniency of 24 hours and it negates the leniency of parave, like the not barnat that's once removed. But again, we said that there's many leniencies, including that onions lose their sharp when they soak in water. When they're cooked, they lose their sharpness. And some say that our onions are not so sharp. So that was another thing we discussed. And we said basically there's 4 leniencies why almost always finding utensils in sinks of the opposite type is never a problem. And that was because of the water is usually not a kli rishon. It's a lot of times, most of the time, it's a kli shlishi, but sometimes a kli sheni. But in that, it's not enough of a transfer of taste because again, kli sheni, kli shlishi. Most of the time, the water is not hot enough. Many times, it's not a ben yaimai. Many times, there's soap. So between all that, most of the time, the sink shilas are not sink, not a shilah. And then we discussed. We did say that dishwashers is a little bit more strict, and we did say that sponges should be a little bit more strict. And then we discussed with the last thing we discussed, which Bez Hashem will discuss more in depth next week, if I remember, is the using the urn for both milchiks and fleishiks. So, but just quickly, I see people are asking about the spices. Yeah, so basically, you don't need separate spices if you make sure to keep the spices high enough where the heat coming out. Again, another rule, besides the 24-hour rule, is that anything that's less than 108 degrees cannot transfer a taste. So therefore, when you have spices and you're putting it into a soup, it's very rare that the steam coming out of that soup is hot enough that you can't keep your hand there. And the proof to that is that your hand is there in order to put in the spices and your hand is not getting burnt. So really, this whole reason to have separate spices is a stringency because sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it could be hot. Or sometimes when children especially would take spices and putting it onto their pasta and they end up touching the actual hot pasta to the spices or to the ketchup, right? So then it would have to be very hot, but if push comes to shove in a b'diavad, it's almost never is that the steam coming out of that pot hot enough. Even if you put the spices in hot over the pot, it's only like if you have the pot here. Again, I'm not very experienced in the kitchen. I'm experienced eating in the kitchen. I'm not experienced cooking in the kitchen. So if this is the top of the soup pot, it's very rare that when you're putting in the spices at this height, that the heat coming out of there is so hot that you can't keep your hand there. If it would be that hot, then your spices would become meat. But most of the time, it's not so hot. So that's why. But many say still have separate spices just because you don't want to get into any shilas. But me'ikar adin, it's going to be okay. Okay, we'll stop there. The learning again should be either for the neshama, for the neshamas, and a schus for all those especially in Eretz Yisrael, for all those in need Yeshua. I'll just say a parak Tilim now, followed by a chenu. Either you can follow along with me, but it'll be Pei Gimel, Simon Pei Gimel in Tilim. Okay, Shir Mizmar La'asaf. Elohim Adam Milach Al Techerash Al Tishkait El Ki Hinei Oyevecha Yomayim Misanecha Nasu Rosh Al Amacha Yarim Usaid V'Yisrael Tzal Tzvunecha Amaru L'chuven Achidei Migai V'Lo Yizachu Shem Yisrael Oid Ki Noitzu Leiv Yachtav Alecha B'Sikraisu Alei Adam V'Yishmaelim Ayov Agren Kval V'Aman V'Amalek V'Leshes and Yosh V'Tzor Gam Ashur Nuva Imam Hoy Yisrael L'Bnei Loit Sela Asei Lahem Kimidyon Ki Sisro Chiyavim Menachal Kishan Nishmidu ve'endor ha'yidon la adama shisema nidivema ka'ira v'chazev v'zevach u'chitzalmuna kol nesichema asher amru nir shalanu es nois elihim elihai shisema ka'galgal kikash lifnei ruach ka'esh devar yor u'chalava lahei tarim ke'entir defender sarecha v'sefas v'sevalem malech f'meim kolon v'yivach shishimcha alina yevosh yirubal ader v'yovedu v'yedu k'yata shimcha alina l'medecha al yoin I'll call Ba'aretz, Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanasunu Matzara Rashivya. Vayim Devei Vayom Vayim Vayibashem Amalkayim, Yirachem Aleichem, V'yetzem, Yitzar Levacha, Me'afelu La'ira, Meshiva Legula, Hashtov Ha'agalav Zman Kariv, V'naiman Amen. Should only hear Pesudas Tavis. Thank you for listening. A good tvach and a good yah.